Even more text messages have been released that would have been flying back and forth on the Republican side on January 6th. And there really was an attempt by many of these people who since then have implied that everything that was happening was totally fine. In fact, it was patriotic. At the time, they really did want to stop it. So you have Tom Price, who was former President Trump's Secretary of Health and Human Services, apparently texting Mark Meadows. POTUS should go on air and defuse this. Extremely important. Glad that he emphasized that. Representative Jeff Duncan also messaging Meadows. Now we know said POTUS needs to calm this S down. Representative Chip Roy says fix this now. And of course, you can't fix a problem unless you have some influence over it. They're all admitting that clearly this is a guy who will have control over these people, which is not what you would think if you were actually convinced that they were all Antifa. They're not gonna listen to the president if they're left-wing provocateurs. Anyway, Mick Mulvaney said, Mark, he needs to stop this now. Can I do anything to help? I don't know, maybe along the way at some point during that first term you could have done something to help, but instead we ended up at January 6th. And Reince Priebus in all caps tweeted or texted, tell them to go home. Even Don Jr. texted, he's got to condemn this S. Now, some of the others might have been able to get through. That was just Don Jr. Trump's not gonna listen to him. But everybody was trying to get through on that day.
All right, so this is beyond the text because CNN has a couple of new things here. First of all, they interviewed more than a dozen of the texters themselves. And they said every one of them, that doesn't mean every one of the texters, it means every one of the ones that they reached. So I don't imagine they got to Don Jr., but I don't know. But potentially guys like Mick Mulvaney and Reince Priebus, two former chiefs of staff to Donald Trump, more than a dozen of them confirmed, yeah, those are my texts and I meant it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is top officials in the Trump administration saying, yeah, we knew Trump's basically a maniac. And on top of that, this is really important, we knew he could stop it. And we knew he was choosing not to stop it. And he waited for hours and hours and hours. And in fact, if you remember when Kevin McCarthy called him, also reported by another Republican, this is 100% confirmed, Trump apparently told McCarthy, hey, those protesters apparently care more about my administration, care more about the country than you do, Kevin. In other words, I'm happy that they broke into the house and that you're afraid for your life.
Yeah.
And earlier today, we carried the story of Vice President Pence's chief of staff asking the Secret Service on January 5th, the day before, we think the president might put us in physical danger. Can you protect us from the president? So they all know what a monster Donald Trump is. The problem is, as always, the Republican voters don't like him despite that. They like him because of that.
Yeah.
And so whenever this goes to the voters, they go, what part of vicious, lying, pathological, narcissist, hateful, and violent leader did you misunderstand? We voted for it many times. We're still backing him 100%. So every vicious thing that you see that Trump did and that the Republicans knew, the Republican voters are perfectly okay with.
Yeah, and the other part of it is, again, going back to what they're going to do next week at these hearings on the January 6th when they have open hearings, is this stuff. This stuff's going to be there, right? All of it's going to be there. All these texts that were sent to Mark Meadows. And it mattered to those people when they didn't know it was going to be public. So it has to try and matter to some of these people when it is public, who can stand up and see a former president and what he didn't do that day. If you thought he should have done it, then admit that it should have happened, admit what was going on. Like Johnny said, if it was Antifa, right, they wouldn't have gone to this president to stop it. They knew it wasn't. And that's what has to come. These hearings have to matter. And this stuff is what needs to make them matter more than any of it.
Yeah, and I don't know if the people who CNN reached out to, who Cenk referenced, I don't know if they're going to be speaking at or whatever, but they've been willing to go on the record. Alyssa Farah Griffin, the former Trump director of strategic communications, said, I thought the president could stop it and was the only person who could stop it, saying that they would have listened to him on the inside. And Mick Mulvaney said, I wish someone had responded to my outreach. And we have to be super clear. the delay in him coming out and saying it didn't just produce a couple more hours of, hey, it's chaotic, there's people, and a lectern got moved. People died. Lots of cops, 114 cops were injured, 7 people lost their lives. Some cops committed suicide in the wake of it. Perhaps if it hadn't gone on for hours, some of them might not have. I don't know that they're that focused on the woman who was shot anymore on the right. At one point, they had been raising her up as kind of like a martyr to the MAGA movement or whatever. But if he had immediately told them all to leave, would she have died? Would she have been shot? She thought she was working for him. The 850 people who've been charged with crimes who are going to spend time in prison might lose their jobs. Those are all devoted MAGA people. Would those horrible things have happened to them? The derailing of their life, if Trump had just been clear from the very beginning that they shouldn't be there. He screwed over all of those people. People died because he didn't act. People who love him and trust him died because he refused to say anything.
And by the way, he was hoping that they would be even more scared for their lives, so they would go back in and redo the election basically and not certify it. That's why he waited all that time. And so one of the rioters was overheard once he finally put out the tweet saying, you guys are amazing, you're the best people I've ever met. Thank you for causing this violence and breaking into the Capitol, etc. But okay, I guess you should go home. And one of the rioters was overheard after the tweet going, oh, he's telling us to go home, let's go. So of course they were waiting. Yeah. Who did they do it for? Like Elmer Fudd? No, they did it for Donald Trump, obviously, right? And they're in there, they're chanting hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence nearly gets killed. No word, no word, no word. Because you know what a monster he is. And again, last thing, all those guys who were not just worried about the safety and well-being of certainly of the Democrats, but of their own Republican colleagues, that was part of their concern. But their bigger concern, if we're being honest about these generally scummy politicians, is that they were worried he was going to hurt the Republican Party.
Yeah.
But you know what? Unfortunately, they were wrong. Trump was right. It didn't hurt the Republicans at all. If the election were held today, Trump would beat Biden. The Republican base loved the violence. They haven't backed off of Trump at all, not 1%. They would all vote for him instantly today. And since the Democrats are so weak right now in the polls, Biden's losing badly. And so that monster could be back in office. And he ain't ever leaving if he gets back in office.
That was the first inkling, what just happened in Georgia in the elections, where Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, won re-election as in the face of Trump's criticism, and Brian Kemp, whatever we may think of him, the fact that we're rooting for Kemp now is unbelievable. But the fact that he won re-election against a Trump endorsed, that could be a breath of hope.
Yeah, don't.
No, a breath is not. You need a lot of breath.
Yeah, and Raffensperger maybe because that was so obvious and there wasn't a huge Democratic opponent there. But Kemp, they mainly seem to have voted for him because they were worried that Perdue was going to lose to Stacey Abrams. So the Republican voters kind of made a political calculation there, which I'm surprised by. Usually they just slavishly follow whatever the Mad King says. But yes, there they didn't. So it's worthy of note. One down. Yeah. 49 states left to go, maybe.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.